It was an especially cold December morning when Stuart got into his car's icy cabin. After starting the engine, he warmed it up a little and drove cautiously onto the nearly empty road. Stuart was on his way to a neighboring town to make a deal with a new supplier of auto parts for his store. Recently, he had been unlucky with suppliers, so he hoped that this time the negotiations would go well. Thankfully, Stuart was right this time. He was able to agree on shipments that were supposed to start from the new year. After shaking hands with his new partner, he went outside. Delighted with the successful deal, Stuart decided to stop by a store and buy a gift for his wife, Emily. He pulled up near a shopping center, walked among the many stores, and chose a beautiful watch for Emily with a gold-plated case from an expensive boutique. By the time Stuart left the city, it was already dark and heavy snow had started to fall. Visibility on the road was rapidly deteriorating, and even with the headlights on and the windshield wipers working, it was almost impossible to see anything in the distance. When Stuart drove onto an intersection, he only had time to notice something dark on the left with his peripheral vision. He started to brake, but it was already too late. A heavy logging truck that had jumped onto the highway easily knocked Stuart's car off the road, crushing the driver's side with its huge bumper. "Hey, how are you there? Are you alive?" Stuart struggled to open his eyes and saw through the broken glass the face of an unfamiliar man. The man immediately got busy, tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. Then he ran for a pry bar, and with difficulty, but broke the battered door, and picking Stuart up by the arms, dragged him outside. Stuart gathered his strength, turned his head, looked at his feet, and was horrified that his feet were completely crushed and left bloody tracks in the snow. His last strength left him, and Stuart lost consciousness. He woke up in the hospital. The first thing he did was try to move his toes, and realizing they were gone, moaned in pain and despair. A gray-haired doctor came into the ward, carefully examined his bandaged limbs, and seeing the patient's suffering on his face, said, "Well, calm down, please. It's not as bad as it could have been. You lost a lot of blood, and it's just a miracle that you survived." Emily arrived in the evening, tears in her eyes, as she sat down next to him and took his hand in hers. Stuart looked at her and remembered buying her a watch at the store, and groaned at his own foolishness. "I stopped by the store to buy you a watch. Why couldn't I have just stayed home?" he muttered. "Stuart, everything will be good, don't worry." His wife tried to reassure him, holding his hand tighter. "What's so good about this? Who needs me now?" Stuart said irritably. "Tell Graham to manage the store himself from now on," he added, turning to the wall. After being discharged, Emily suggested that Stuart live in his late grandfather's old house, outside the city, surrounded by nature. Stuart agreed, seeing it as a good idea. Emily packed her husband's things in a suitcase, and one more time offered to hire a caregiver for Stuart, but he angrily refused. He got out of bed to show her that he could take care of himself, but a sharp pain in his lower back forced him back onto the bed. Gritting his teeth to keep from screaming in pain, he made another attempt and moved to his wheelchair, showing his wife that he didn't need anyone's help. With a proud look, he left the room. Everything in his grandfather's house was as simple as ever, but beautiful in its own way. Stuart gazed at his grandfather's portrait, and suddenly remembered what he was like when he was alive. Although it had been 5 years since his passing, Stuart still vividly remembered his grandpa. He remembered his face, overgrown with stiff bristles, and his old crumpled work shirt, stained with gasoline and tobacco. He wore it all the time, taking it off only for washing. Grandfather died 5 years ago, but Stuart still missed him. These memories took him back to the distant past. He remembered the times when his mother was still alive, before she was diagnosed with cancer. Every morning she used to make him pancakes and carrot fritters, which he loved. It all felt so close now that Stuart completely withdrew into himself and sat in his wheelchair, hypnotized. "Stuart, are you even listening to me?" Emily called out to him. "I might be leaving soon. Don't miss me too much. I'll be back. And call me if you need anything, okay?" Stuart nodded. "Don't forget about me while you're gone," he joked, but his wife flinched at his words. "How can you say that?" Emily said, offended. Then she kissed her husband goodbye and left quietly. Stuart watched as the heavy door closed behind his wife, and at that moment it seemed to him that he had lost her for the last time. He instinctively jerked forward, but a sharp pain pierced his back, and he, groaning, wearily sank into his wheelchair. A month passed. At first Emily called Stuart almost every day, inquiring about his health, offering help, but then her calls became less frequent and finally stopped altogether. Stuart, in a troubled foreboding, tried to reach Emily himself, but her phone did not answer. Stewart guessed that Emily had left him and decided to live her own life, so he soon gave up his attempts to contact her. Deep down he understood his wife, because not everyone can find the strength to take on such a heavy burden as him, but resentment firmly settled in his heart and did not give him peace, neither day nor night. One evening, lost in troubled thoughts, Stewart suddenly heard the gate creak outside. He looked out the window, but it was already quite dark outside, and he didn't see anyone. Thinking that he had imagined it, he was about to immerse himself in his thoughts again, but then he clearly heard a knock on the door. "It's open, come in," Stewart called out, wondering who could come to visit him at this time. The door opened and, to his surprise, Stewart saw his neighbor, Penelope, standing on the threshold. She was petite, slender, and modestly dressed. He looked her up and down and gestured for her to sit at the table. The girl walked timidly into the room and sat down opposite. "Hi, Stewart," she said. "I was passing by and saw the lights in the window, so I decided to stop by. How long have you been here?" "It's been a month. I just haven't left the house," Stewart said gloomily as he rolled out from behind the table, demonstrating his wheelchair. "What happened to you?" Penelope exclaimed concernedly. Stewart wearily waved his hand and told Penelope the story. He had barely finished when they heard a noise from outside, and then someone, drunk, started calling out for Penelope rudely. "Is that your stepfather?" Stewart asked. The girl sadly nodded and explained that her stepfather had been drinking heavily for a long time, almost lost his mind, and life with him at home had become unbearable for her. Penelope could have gone to the city to study, but without money it was impossible, and there was nowhere to earn money in the village. Shivering from the cold, Penelope approached the stove to warm her hands and turned to Stewart. "Can I stay with you tonight? I'm scared to go back home." "He'll definitely beat me," Stewart nodded and suggested that Penelope choose any place she felt comfortable. While wincing in pain, he approached the stove and removed a pot of potatoes from the burner. Seeing Stewart's anguish, Penelope took the pot from him and helped set the table. "You need to see Mr. Khazard," she advised. "People come from all over the region to see him. He'll fix your back right away, that sorcerer," Stewart laughed, recalling old Mr. Khazard living in the forest. "He's a healer," Penelope corrected him sternly. "Last summer I dislocated my leg and he fixed it so well that there wasn't even a trace left." Stewart waved his hand, promising to visit Mr. Khazard somehow, and suggested Penelope distract herself from the conversation and finally have dinner. A month passed. Penelope visited Stewart every day, helped with the household chores, chatted with him over a cup of tea, and once brought Mr. Khazard to his place. He immediately examined Stewart, running his fingers over his spine and pressing on one of the vertebrae so hard that Stewart almost passed out. Mr. Khazard told him to endure a little and repeated his manipulations several more times. "Done," he said, patting Stewart gently on the back. "It won't hurt you anymore." Stewart smiled incredulously, but within a few hours he realized that he really felt better. Within a couple of days he could easily turn his torso, bend and straighten his back, and even while sitting in his wheelchair he could do housework. He went out to the garden for the first time and put the plot in order, and didn't even feel tired. Returning to the house, he realized for the first time in months that there were pleasant moments in life. But before he could enjoy this new feeling, he was startled by the unexpected sound of the phone ringing. It was Martha, Emily's sister. She struggled to find the right words for a while, but eventually she gathered the courage to tell Stewart that Emily had decided to file for divorce. Stewart was stunned and didn't know what to say. It seemed to him that the remnants of his world had collapsed into an abyss, taking his hope with it. "Why?" he managed to say after a long silence. "They're planning to get married," Martha said, embarrassed. Stewart felt like he couldn't breathe. He asked Martha to cool back, and after turning off his phone, threw it into the corner of the room. Slowly, he walked to his grandfather's old chest of drawers, opened the top drawer, and took out an antique straight razor with a beautiful bone handle. Stewart ran his finger along the blade to make sure it was still as sharp as it was years ago, and started to think. He imagined himself making just one thin cut, and finally getting rid of the pain in his heart. Bitter thoughts, loneliness at night, and endless suffering. Someone knocked on the gate, and fast footsteps approached. Penelope appeared on the threshold with a large bundle in her hands. "Are you out of your mind, Stewart?" she shouted. "Don't even think about it," she cried, rushing towards him, and snatching the razor from his hand. "Why? Why did you want to do that? Everything was so good. Are you kidding at me? You all say that, but in reality you pity me. What good is it to be without feet, and not be able to live my life to the fullest?" He shouted, and hit his stumps with all his might. Penelope froze in horror and helplessness, not knowing how to react. Then she suddenly came to her senses, and unfolded the bundle she had brought with her. 2 prostheses and crutches fell out onto the floor. "This is what Aunt Helen asked you to deliver," stuttered Penelope, and kneeling down, she attached the prostheses to Stuart's legs. "These are left from her late husband." Penelope helped Stuart to stand up, handed him the crutches, and he, unsteadily, moving on his artificial legs, took a few steps. "Well done! See how great it is!" Penelope rejoiced, tenderly observing every movement of Stuart. Stuart walked around the room, took a breather, and approached the girl. "Thank you. It's really not bad at all," he smiled and held Penelope close to him. The girl immediately hugged Stuart by the neck and kissed him. Regaining her senses, she recoiled in fear, but Stuart managed to grab her by the waist, pulled her close, and running his hand through her lush hair, brought the girl's face so close that their lips met again in a hot kiss. That night they spent together, for the first time as a couple. A week later, Stuart went to the city to divorce his wife and check on the business of the store. The divorce procedure went quickly, and Stuart, dryly saying goodbye to his ex-wife, quickly left the registry office. Emily tried to stop Stuart to ask for forgiveness, but he did not even look at her, and walked past, tightly squeezing the crutches. Stuart called a taxi and went to the store. Entering inside, he looked around confusedly. The store was empty. There were some crumpled boxes and old, unsold parts lying on the dusty showcases. Stuart approached Graham, bent over the cash register, and hit the floor with a crutch with force. Graham looked up and recoiled in horror. "Stuart, if you're about Emily, then she..." He started speaking nervously. "I'm not interested in those details." Stuart interrupted him. "I came about the store. I see things are not going well." Graham collected all the bills and small coins in the cash register, put them in a bag, and handed them to Stuart. "We need to sell the store," he said. "There are no buyers, no profits, only expenses. It's not up to you to decide. This is my store, and I will decide what to do with it. And believe me, I can handle this problem." Stuart sharply replied, and left the store without saying goodbye. Stuart was sorry for his business. He had put great effort into the store, but there was nowhere to take the money for investing in it. The only solution could be a loan from the bank, but he doubted that he would be approved. At home he shared his doubts with Penelope, and the girl suddenly, as if remembering something, looked at him with wide open eyes, and then, asking him to wait a little, ran out onto the street towards her house. She returned in a few minutes, and handed Stuart a large black key, clearly of antique workmanship, decorated with intricate carving. "Your grandfather asked me shortly before his death to keep this key and give it to you. I often came to see him, and he always talked about you. He also asked to pass on this key as from the chest that is hidden in the basement. I don't even know what could be there." "Well, okay, we'll see tomorrow," Stuart smiled. On the next morning, Stuart took out a flashlight, handed it to Penelope, and ordered her to follow him. In the kitchen, he lifted the heavy lid of the pantry, carefully descended, and as soon as he reached the ground, he shouted to Penelope to also come down. When they turned on the flashlight, the darkness dissipated, and in the corner, they saw traces of brickwork. After dismantling the bricks, they pulled out a small iron chest. The key turned with a creak in the hole, a click sounded, and Penelope gingerly lifted the lid off the chest. Inside was a small bag on a string. Stuart took it, untied it, and poured the contents into his palm. Penelope brought the flashlight closer, and froze in amazement. On Stuart's palm, the sharp edges of real precious stones glistened and sparkled with different colors. Penelope and Stuart stood, admiring the incredible and mesmerizing sight. Unable to look away, and everything that was happening seemed like a fairy tale dream to them. Having come to his senses, Stuart chose the biggest ruby from the pile of stones and gave it to Penelope. The girl accepted the gift and began to admire it. "You know," I remembered. "My grandfather once told me about his youth. He worked in the mines, but I never thought that he hid his findings and kept them for so many years." Stuart took a final look at the exquisite treasure, neatly folded the stones back into the bag, and smiled contentedly. He felt confident again, and hoped that everything would be fine for them now, as he could use the inheritance to get the store out of debt, improve the business, and buy himself the most modern prosthesis. "Will you marry me?" he suddenly asked Penelope. "We will sell the stones, leave here and start a new happy life. Do you agree?" "Of course, my love, if you only knew how long I've been waiting for this," she whispered, and hugging Stuart around the neck, buried her face in his chest. Stewart hugged the girl tightly and realized that all the pain and heaviness of the past few months after the accident was finally leaving. Love helped him forget about despair, betrayal, and disappointment, filling his soul with the long-forgotten feeling of incredible, all-consuming. Welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone is having a wonderful day or evening. In today's story, OP found out his wife cheated on him with his gym trainer after he showed up to her work and saw them. He then followed AP home and told his wife about it. Now, OP's wife and AP are a complete wreck after what OP and AP's wife did to get revenge. Now, let's get into today's story to find out what happened. I was 22 years old when I decided to join a gym and build some muscle. It was there that I met my future ex-wife and trainer, who was 25 years old. She was amazingly fit. Whenever I worked out, she became my motivation. She'd joke with me, laugh, and ask me questions about my job and hobbies. I gained muscle under her watch and eventually asked her on a date. Throughout our dating relationship, she never shared anything about herself that I didn't instantly fall in love with. When my dad met her, he insisted that I pop the question. Looking back now, I know it was too soon. I think Dad and I were just excited at the thought of expanding our small family. We had a big wedding. My dad spared no expense. A few years later, we still didn't have a baby, but things seemed to be going fine. She was still a trainer at the gym and I'd moved up in my dad's company. We spent lots of time together because we got home from work at the same time each day. We were open about our cell phones, but I never asked to check hers. I never felt like I needed to until 5 years later. My dad passed away, so I was basically running his business. I started getting home a little later, around 5 p.m., and I'd find her at home being a wonderful housewife and making dinner or something. Well, after a few months of this, she arrived home after me one night. This was odd because she never worked late or did anything without sending me a text. When I asked her where she'd been, she was surprised I didn't get her text. She showed me how she typed out a text to me, but didn't push send. The text said that she was going to give a coworker a ride home because his car wouldn't start. This was just a red flag to me and I knew something was up. She started taking her phone into the bathroom with her, and this was the second red flag. We never made a rule for this, but she'd never done it because she wanted to be in and out quickly. I waited a minute before I walked in on her, trying to see what was on her phone. She was definitely texting someone before she jumped out of her skin and looked like she was caught red-handed. After a verbal fight ensued, I was finally able to check her phone. It was a string of texts to a number that wasn't saved. It appeared that some of the texts were missing because the conversation didn't make sense. Only innocent enough sounding texts were left behind without context. The whole time I checked her phone, she was bright red. I asked for more information, but she swore it was the same friend who needed a ride home, and that nothing was going on. I pretended to let it go, but secretly decided to follow her to work the next day. I saw a male coworker greet her with a smile and hug. I returned later as they were getting off work, and saw him give her another hug. My blood was boiling. Who was this guy, and why was it so normal for him to touch my wife? They chatted about God knows what, until I texted her to say I'd be home late. She looked at the text with him standing beside her, and then leaned close to tell him something. They both walked to his car, got in, and left. I followed them to his house and sat in my car for a few minutes. Before I get out of the car, a woman knocks on my window. She demands to know who I am and why I'm outside of her house. Although I was very confused, I told her what was going on. As she listened, a look of concern spread across her face. She said that she'd been suspecting her husband of cheating with a coworker, and thought he was bringing her here while she worked late. Tonight, she came home early without informing him, and that's when she saw my car. She invited me to join her while she knocked on the door. We held our breath until her husband answered the door. He turned white, and I could see beads of sweat appear on his forehead. He starts playing dumb and asking what's going on right before his wife explodes on him. Her screams urge my wife to rush to the door, adjusting her clothes as she makes eye contact with me. She immediately starts fighting back tears as she explains that she just wanted to come over and hang out with him, something that makes no sense and has no credibility at all. While the wife screams at her husband, I notice my wife's wedding ring is missing from her finger. I demand that she gets in my car, and she does. On the way to pick up her car, she would not admit that they had sex. I was trembling as I drove. My wife never showed me any signs of wanting something different from what we had. I asked her why she slept with him, but she denied it again. She said they were only supposed to hang out, and that she didn't know he was married either. When I asked her why her wedding ring was off, she told me it was because it pinched whenever she lifted weights. I didn't believe her, but I didn't make her leave the house either. A part of me wanted this to be a bad dream. She didn't go back to work, and for about 2 months, she lived each day in suspense and humility while she did her best to please me. I basically ignored her and all the questions my brain wanted answers to. Like, was she still secretly talking to this man? Why won't she admit she had sex when I know she did? Does she even want to be married? How could I ever trust her again? That's when I got an email from that man's wife. My email isn't hard to find if you know my name. She told me that her husband finally told her what happened, that my wife had been to their house at least 2 times before that, and that each time, she had sex with her husband. She added that she was sorry to be the bearer of bad news, and that she planned on informing their boss of the affair. It was the worst news of my life. Instead of talking to me about whatever was going through her head and trying to keep our marriage sacred, she went behind my back and slept with him. The level of betrayal was unspeakable. I confronted her, calling her a liar and showing her the email I received. She started crying and begging me to forgive her. She said that they had chemistry at work, and the thought of sleeping with him just crossed her mind. She said it was a mistake to go through with it, and that she's hated herself ever since it happened. I told her I didn't believe a damn word she said, because apparently, she had gone back to his house more than once to sleep with him. It takes an awful lot of deceit and intent to keep going back like that. She cheated on me more than once with some guy she knew for about a month. I told her how upset I was that she never tried to talk to me about any of it while pretending she had no secrets from me. Because of her infidelity and lies, I filed for divorce. My dad raised me to be emotionally strong and to make decisions that need to be made. I'm almost glad he died before she did this, so that according to him, we lived happily ever after. But no! Instead of that, her affair and bad reputation became the hot gossip of our small town. The dude was kicked out by his wife around the same time I kicked out my ex. They were both fired, divorced at a young age, and labeled as cheaters. I heard he won't date her because he doesn't trust her. Go figure. A few weeks later, I took the betrayed wife out for dinner, and we had a good time. OP, I am very sorry your wife was unfaithful to you. People make mistakes, but when it comes to this level of betrayal, it's hard to recover from it. As long as you try to stay with her, you probably second-guess everything she said, and never truly feel comfortable in a relationship. Marriage requires hard work and honesty, both of which seem far-fetched to that woman. She went back more than once to commit the same sin against you, and was only remorseful after she was caught. This type of woman is not mature enough or ready for marriage, and sometimes it's a lesson learned too late. I am happy for you that you made the quick and accurate decision to get divorced. It can be difficult for people to make this decision, although it is often the better option when it comes to infidelity. Keep yourself number one in your life until you find someone who becomes just as important. Now let's get into today's second story. My ex and I have attended the same church since we were kids. Well, not anymore, and you'll understand at the end. We started dating each other when she was 20 and I was 21. Our parents were both strict in our religion, and expected us to abstain from sex until marriage. We agreed at first, but it became quite a challenge, and we did it a few times. Around the time I proposed, we began attending separate Bible study groups for men and women. Each group would discuss things like how important it was to keep yourself pure until marriage under God, what was expected of a Christian wife or husband, and stuff like that. These groups met at the same time once a week, and I would drive my fans home afterward. One night, I waited an extra 10 minutes for her to come out of the church. It wasn't too odd to me, and I didn't ask anything. She seemed happy and fine. The next week, I waited 15 minutes. This time, I asked what held her up. She said she likes talking to one of the leaders after the lesson to get a better understanding of it. I didn't want to push any further, so I let it go. The next week, as I'm waiting for her to come out of the church, one of the women from her group knocked on my window. She says she wants to let me know that my fiancé has been staying later to talk to a man that helps out with sound tech during their meetings. This really took me by surprise. She was staying later to talk to another man. I'd been under the impression only women were allowed in the group, including staff. When my fiancé finally got back to the car, I asked her about it. She got defensive and asked why it's a big deal for her to talk to a church leader about Bible lessons. I clarified that this man doesn't participate in the women's group. He's only there as a technical assistant. Then I asked why she was talking to him about the lessons of such a personal journey. She just shrugged and said she didn't think anyone from the church was off limits for Bible discussions. I asked her to stop talking to him altogether, and she agreed to stop so that I wouldn't worry. The next week, I was waiting for her to get back to the car when I got a text from her that said she'd already gotten a ride home from a girl in the group. This really upset me. The church doors only open from the inside this late at night. I tried calling her several times, but she didn't answer. As a woman was walking back to her car, I asked her if she happened to see my finance inside. She said no, the room was empty. I drove to her house and knocked on the door. No one answered. I assumed it was because they were sleeping and I didn't have a key. I decided to give up for the night and had faith that the truth would soon be revealed. On Sunday morning after the service, a church leader waited until my fiancée went into the bathroom to pull me aside and tell me some concerning news. We went into a little security room with some other church staff and lots of screens. They directed my attention to one screen and apologized for having to show me this. In the video, my fiancée can be seen with the tech man going into a room alone. They emerge later looking pleased. I asked if they have video footage of the room they went into, and they say yes, but that I wouldn't want to see that. The man in question was most definitely not aware there was a camera in that room as well. I'm sure my face was bright red at this point. I hated her for embarrassing me like this. I still do a little bit. Someone left the security room to retrieve my fiancée and the man in question. Funny coincidence that they were chatting with each other when he found them. As soon as they enter the room, they know this is bad. The guy tries to leave immediately, but he's stopped by the pastor of the church. He says that we need to discuss this and the repercussions that will follow. After the clip of them going in the room played, my fiancée's tears started flowing and she told me she was sorry. I told her that we were over and got her engagement ring back. She loudly sobbed while the pastor told the guy he's fired and may have charges pressed against him. He then left the room and I followed him, brushing past my ex. I followed him outside and heavily considered fighting him, but I didn't feel like I needed to. My fiancée caught up to me and started begging for forgiveness. I told her that she has ultimately shamed herself, her faith, and me. There's no way she can recover my trust, and it would be much easier for me to just move on and start over new. For the next few weeks at church, everyone was talking about her, him, and their shame. They didn't attend the church anymore. Everyone stole glances at me as I walked by, and only a few people attempted to console me about it. It didn't take long for me to decide I needed a new church. My ex lost all credibility with the people she held closest to her. I can only hope to find a good wife that holds the same values I do. Wow. Up. That is a very difficult thing to go through. It sounds like your ex and that guy got the shame and disgrace that they deserved. It just pains me that you were outcast as well. You had your heart in a good place, attempting to do things properly when she decided to take advantage of you. The good news is that, like you expected, the truth did come out and you have an opportunity to marry a woman that deserves your loyalty and dedication. Even if it feels like the world around you is falling apart, there is hope. Hope is stubborn and doesn't give up on us. As long as we are true to ourselves and practice self-love, we are on the right path. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened in both stories. I am 36 years old and my wife is 38. We first met when I was in my third year of college and she was in her fourth. We've been together since that day. After 3 years of dating, we decided to move in together. 3 more years passed and we got married. 2 years later, our joy increased when my wife became pregnant and we welcomed the birth of our daughter. As in any normal family, we had a fair share of domestic quarrels, but we always managed to make up quickly, sometimes even in the midst of a quarrel. Overall, we were a classic family. After finishing my education, I started my career path by working hard to climb the corporate ladder. In the end, I earned enough to afford a spacious 4-room apartment. We invested in a major renovation and happily settled in our new apartment. My wife also resumed her career after maternity leave and everything went well for her. She got a good position and started earning a decent income. By combining our income, we were financially prosperous. Over time, we acquired everything we needed, a new apartment for our growing daughter, expensive cars, and all the amenities that one could wish for. Life seemed abundant. I deeply loved my wife and remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. I was not a heavy drinker, but sometimes I allow myself to drink a glass of wine at dinner. Smoking was a habit I recently gave up. We always plan our holidays together and I developed a passion for diving and skiing. While my wife decided not to dive out of fear, she learned to ski. Our life revolved around work, earning money, and enjoying the fruits of our labor. My wife's work was connected with international business, which often required her to receive colleagues from abroad for negotiations. Gradually, I began to notice that her communication with these colleagues seemed to last longer than before. Although it seemed curious to me, at first, I didn't pay much attention to it. Another notable change was that she started receiving Snapchat messages in the evenings. Strangely, whenever her foreign colleagues were around, these messages stopped coming. I checked her phone a couple of times after she fell asleep, but all the messages were deleted. I noticed that the last message was always around 7 p.m., despite the fact that the phone received notifications after she had already gone to bed. In the end, suspicion consumed me completely. One day, she came home late around 10 p.m. and I, foolishly, jokingly asked if she had said goodbye to her lover. The fear that flashed in her eyes was something I had never seen before. However, as soon as she realized that I was teasing her, she smiled and brushed it off, calling me a fool. Moreover, she sometimes went abroad to visit her colleagues in return. When my suspicions reached a peak, I couldn't take it anymore. I resorted to installing a spyware on her phone, which allowed me to control it remotely via SMS or from my personal account. This program could record the audio of the environment, take photos with the camera, and send all the data to my personal account. One day, she went on another business trip, and in the evening, I came home from work. I spent time with our daughter, helped her with her homework, and put her to bed by 10 p.m. As soon as she fell asleep, I gained access to the spyware account and ordered it to record her phone's surrounding sound for 10 minutes. After a few minutes, a recording appeared on my account, and after listening to it, I heard my wife's voice in the room with a man. They spoke English and I understood every word. They discussed the mundane aspects of life and laughed. I realized that they were alone in the room. Suddenly, I heard the clink of glasses in their laughter. At that moment, my heart started pounding wildly. I sent another command to record for an additional 20 minutes and take a picture of the environment. To my horror, the photo turned out to be a black square indicating that the phone was placed with the camera down. I quickly instructed the program to take a picture using the front camera. The resulting photo showed the phone lying on the bedside table in the room, a part of the headboard of the bed, and a wall lamp standing next to it. 15 minutes later, another recording appeared that made me shiver. I played the tape back and heard them laughing and talking again. I found myself in a state of disbelief and shock if my whole world was collapsing before my eyes. Stunned, I poured myself a drink and ordered the program to record for 4 hours, after which I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. The next morning, Thursday, I was completely shattered. Since it was time for my daughter to go to school, I told her that she was not required to attend classes that day. I notified my boss that I would take a couple of personal days until Monday. My wife was supposed to return on Sunday. Then I sat down and started listening to the 4-hour recording. However, I only managed to listen for 40 minutes because it was at that moment that I heard the unmistakable sounds of my wife's pleasure, the same sounds that I had known well for more than 13 years. It felt like a knife was stabbed into my heart, causing both emotional and physical pain. Stunned, I rushed to the bathroom and threw up, unable to figure out if it was from a hangover or from the current situation. I stood under an icy shower for 20 minutes, desperately looking for some relief. After that, I took her daughter to visit her grandparents, assuring her that I would explain everything later and return home alone. My wife called during lunch and sincerely asked how I was doing. I stood there in silence, unable to say a word, pretending that the connection was bad. I told her that I was unwell and would stay at home for a couple of days, and that I entrusted our daughter to the care of her grandmother. That day was the most painful in my life. I witnessed a personal health feeling completely lost and unsure of what to do. My head was filled with an incessant buzzing that drowned out my own thoughts. I sat on the couch and cried like a child as waves of anger and apathy overwhelmed me. The more I expressed my emotions, the more they dulled in me. By the end of the day, I was emotionally exhausted. In the evening, I returned to the spyware account and started issuing commands to the phone. I got the photos. Some were taken from her bag and others from the table. There were recordings of her performances in restaurants with numerous voices, obviously her colleagues. Then in the course of the evening, I came across something. The phone was again on the bedside table, recording her voice along with someone else's. However, this time, there were no intimate sounds. Unable to take it anymore, I called her. After 4 rings, she answered, noticeably out of breath. I asked her about her heavy breathing, to which she replied that the hotel elevator had failed, and she had to climb the stairs to her room. I talked to her for a while, trying my best to keep my voice calm and even. I had announced my intention to go to bed, wished her good night, hung up the phone, and quickly sent a command to the spy program, requesting a quick series of pictures with the front camera. That's when she made a mistake. After our call, she put the phone not on the bedside table, but on the bed next to her. Consequently, the front-facing camera started sending slightly tilted, but candid photos. Images of her sitting astride another person with her head thrown back. This was followed by a recording that captured those unmistakable sounds that any husband would recognize, instantly revealing her actions. That was the last straw for me. I kept these notes and materials. Although at that moment, she was already a complete stranger to me. From that moment on, I refrained from further investigations until Sunday because everything became painfully clear. I was considering my next steps. Should I seek a divorce? What about our 9-year-old daughter? On Sunday, late at night, she came home, eager to kiss me. I recoiled, reminding her that I was sick. I wanted to hit her to unleash my anger. Having retired to the office, I went to sleep on the sofa. The next morning, I got up before her and went to work, unable to be around her anymore. I'd endured the day mechanically, then approached my boss and asked for an urgent week's vacation. I recorded all the evidence on a flash drive, and then I called my wife, telling her that I was going on a business trip for one day, but asked her not to take our daughter away from her grandmother, as I had a surprise in store for her. That evening, when I got home, I quickly packed my bag. She helped me pack my things, behaving politely and innocently. However, her hypocrisy only inflamed my rage. I grabbed my bag, put the USB stick on the bedside table in the bedroom, and called a taxi to our second apartment, the one that was reserved for our daughter. Once there, I called a friend and offered to go abroad for a few days for a while. He agreed, and we quickly booked tickets for an early morning flight to Munich. It was there that I revealed everything to him. We drank, wandered around the city, and socialized with other women. To be honest, I no longer felt any affection for my wife. I ignored her calls and only sent her a message instructing her to insert the USB stick into my laptop. After about half an hour, my phone continuously lit up with calls and messages, but I refrained from reading any of them. I just didn't care anymore, so I turned off my phone. We continued our adventures in Munich for 3 more days before I flew home on Saturday. When I got back, I turned on my phone and it took me 5 minutes to process a lot of messages sent by my wife. However, I decided not to read them for fear falling into confusion before entering the apartment. When I went inside, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. I silently put down my bag, took off my shoes, and was about to wash my hands when she came out of the bedroom. Oh my God! I've never seen her so disheveled and swollen with her face covered in tears. She fell to her knees, trying to explain something incoherently between sobs and slime. I kept a stony expression on my face, convincing her not to make a circus. Then, in a calm tone, I asked her what we were going to do next. She begged me to forgive. Again, tears snot. She said that she had played too much, that she did not understand how she had come to this. She started calling herself scum, etc. But I caught myself thinking that I no longer feel pity or rage for her. She screamed that she loved and had always loved only me, and all this happened only because she got stuffed and realized during all the days that I was gone that she had broken our crystal castle with her own hand. But as they say, revenge is a dish that should be served cold. I said that now we are not husband and wife. Now we are just mom and just dad for our daughter. And we will pretend that everything is fine with us, but I will live my life and you can live yours. You're not the only one for me anymore. You're just my partner in raising a child. Maybe someday I'll change my mind, but now I'm just sick of just the thought of intimacy with her. By the way, I told her where I was and what I was doing. She said that she understood everything and was ready to endure as long as it took. Well, no one pulled her tongue. As a result, now we live in the same apartment. Although honestly, I've already bought another one for myself and issued it to my father so that there would be no claims in case of property division. I sleep almost constantly in the office, although sometimes I go to sleep in the bedroom for the sake of my daughter. On the part of my wife, there were a couple of attempts to try to hug me when I lay down in the same bed with her, but I stopped them harshly. We haven't had intimacy for 3 months. She didn't tell her parents anything. Only her father knows of mine. We agreed that once a year we go on vacation as a family for a week, but now it would be separate beds. I'm constantly hanging out with friends and have new acquaintances among them. There are beautiful women. I sometimes think when she'll come up and say that she's had enough and she leaves or, for example, files for divorce and we divide the property, but she doesn't. I constantly catch her looking at me. Like the look of a shriek cat, but I honestly don't give a shit. Although I see that she is trying, but I revel in her pain. Recently, I defiantly put a pack of condoms on the desk in the office to look at. Despite her reaction, she came in to say something, saw them on the table, and flew out of the office like a bullet, probably crying, did not catch up. She still goes to work, but she really doesn't stay late. Although honestly, I don't follow practically. Somehow, she came up and tried to explain to me that she had broken off all relations with that man except business, and it seems like at work, she will still have to communicate with him by letters or in negotiations, but she swears that she does not even approach him now. By the way, this freak also has a family, to which I told her that her relationship with sexual partners does not concern me and she is free to do what she wants. It is not necessary to report on whether she spread her legs today or not. I myself sometimes come back after midnight now or vice versa. I leave when my daughter goes to bed from Friday to Saturday, for example. Naturally, I do not limit myself in anything. If I want sex, then it will definitely take place. I come in the morning and go to the office to sleep off or to the bedroom if she is not there anymore. Nothing has changed in the home routine. I still buy groceries. I love and know how to cook. We had cleaning on the incoming housekeeper, so nothing has changed here. I have been paying for the apartment and I am still paying. Where she spends her money and whether she spends it, I do not care. Communication like loving each other is only for our daughter or her parents if they come. Although it seems to me that if I tell my mother-in-law, she will probably strangle her right in front of my eyes. I have a great relationship with my mother-in-law. She is an intelligent woman and strictly respects family values. Surely, this is another argument why the wife does not want to leave. Apparently, she is afraid of her mother. Because mom will definitely ask the question, what the hell is going on? And I am not going to lie. In general, I mock her as much as I can and I really enjoy it. Yes, maybe I have become a monster now, but she herself gave birth to that monster. And you know what amazes me? Her perseverance and patience. It's like a red flag to a bull for me. I wonder how much more she can take. And please don't start with the whole, she's the mother of your child, blah blah blah. What she was giving herself to that jerk, she didn't care much about that. For half a year, going on business trips or spreading her legs in this city without thinking about our daughter or her husband. No comment. Every time I feel like my armor will crack, I remember that day, what I felt back then, and it eases me. I become stone again. So this is how I live now. Everything is fine with our daughter. We are great parents and I still help her with her lessons in the evenings. Our mutual friends know nothing. Maybe when I get tired of tormenting her or realize that enough is enough, I'll switch off the bastard mode and have a talk with her. But not now. Not now. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Until next time, I'll see you again. At the time this went down 4 months ago, my wife, 35, and I, 33, had been married for 2 years. I was scheduled to go on a 2-day-long business trip, leaving extremely early one day and returning the next day in the evening. Well, after 5 hours of driving, the trip was cancelled. I wasn't terribly bothered because I was used to driving and would be compensated for my time. I decided to return home unexpectedly. When I arrived, I was surprised to see another car parked beside my wife's. It was her brother's car. He was a buff dude, married with a baby that my wife would often babysit. She loved it because she looked forward to becoming a mother. Her and her brother were really close and enjoyed hiking. It didn't matter what the weather was like, all year round they would go on long hiking expeditions together. I didn't mind, it was their thing and I was not an outdoorsy person. I'd usually work a little more or dedicate time to my hobby of building miniature boats. Although I fully supported their relationship, I became a little weary of my wife's brother when he became exceptionally emotional at our wedding and planted a huge kiss on his sister's lips. I couldn't do anything about it, it happened so fast. He asked me to forgive him later, blaming what he did on the high emotions he felt seeing his sister get married and leave the family. When I arrived home and parked behind my wife's car, I could hear slow music playing loudly. It was an odd setting to imagine my wife and brother-in-law in. I didn't have to imagine it because I walked in on them slow dancing together. He was holding her close to his body, their embrace was that of a romantic couple's. When they noticed my presence, they broke apart quickly and looked really guilty. I knew my marriage was in jeopardy by their expressions. My wife tried to say her brother needed emotional support because his marriage was struggling. To me, that did not explain why they were slow dancing in my living room. As hard as it was, I didn't ask them any more questions. They were aware of how odd it looked. I didn't have to wait long before my wife went to go babysit her baby niece one day. She accidentally left her phone behind and I found her WhatsApp. It revealed that she was sexting her brother, sending pictures, saying I love you, and arranging hookups with him by claiming she was going to babysit. It was the most disgusting and disturbing discovery I ever made in my life. I threw her phone and ran to the bathroom to be sick. Everyone always assumed they were really close because they had trouble making friends when they were younger and shared an enthusiasm for hiking that no one else in the family did. I wouldn't confront her about it immediately because it certainly wouldn't have stopped them. I realized that I was just the cover husband so she could have a secret sexual relationship with her blood brother. I went back to her phone as I boiled with anger and betrayal and took screenshots to send to myself. I planned out my revenge, which involved a bit of acting on my part. It was excruciating to see her behave so normally when returned home, like she didn't just hook up with her brother behind my back. I too acted as though everything was normal. I laid awake beside her that night in our marital bed. The very next morning, I hired a PI to get me photos of them. When I announced the truth, she wouldn't be able to wiggle out of the consequences. Not long after, she claimed she was going on a hiking trip with her brother and I played along, notifying the PI. He called me late that night and notified me that she got a hotel room with her brother along the beach a few hours away. I started packing my things because it was only a matter of time before I got pictures. I didn't know why they weren't actually hiking together this time, but I didn't care either. At this point, I didn't care about anything and just felt numb. I received pictures of them walking on the beach and boardwalk like newlyweds. His hand on her butt, full kisses on the lips, staring into each other's eyes over drinks at the bar, both of them entering a hotel room, clearly in a romantic relationship. I was ready to leave, but before I left, I invited her immediate and extended family and friends over, including her brother's wife and baby. I printed large copies of the pictures I received and hung them all over the house, starting at the front door. On my way out, I left a note on the door instructing them to let themselves in. Little did they know, I left town for my friend's house with all my belongings and no plans to return. They called me after they entered home, frantically asking me what those pictures were. I spelled it out for them on speakerphone. These two members of the family were incestuous freaks that have probably been in a sexual relationship since they lived with their parents. Then I told them where they currently were if they didn't believe me and wanted to see for themselves. Hours later, I got a call from my soon-to-be ex-wife. She was screaming and I could hear the chaos in the background. It became clear that her entire family and a few of her friends had shown up at their hotel. Her brother was being beaten by cousins and the hotel called the police. She asked why I did this to her and I told her she deserved it. She had been living a lie that she wouldn't be able to continue anymore. I told her the divorce papers were on the table and she started wailing, so I hung up. I was hurt enough as it was and didn't want to dwell on how her life would turn out. Her mom called me a few days later to apologize on behalf of her daughter and son. She updated me and said the police never arrived at the hotel, so hotel staff started breaking up the fight themselves. In the chaos, the brother and sister fled to escape scrutiny. The whole family was a wreck for a few days, but things are settling amongst them now. The wife of the brother is filing for divorce as well, along with custody and child support. Before they fled, neither of them signed divorce papers, so that's a waiting game for now. I'm relieved this was all exposed when it was because I can't imagine continuing that relationship any longer without knowing the truth. I just want to put this all behind me and I feel like I'm on the right track. I found a nice place and continue working for the same company I was in. I'm continuing to take this one step at a time. This whole thing is still so surreal for me. OP, I can't imagine the emotional torment you've been through. I'm so relieved you didn't decide to start having children with her before all of this was revealed. It would have been horrible if she got pregnant by her brother and tried to claim the inbred child was yours. Although this discovery caused you pain, it is so much better that the truth is out. I love how you handled this situation because you knew announcing it immediately wouldn't cause them to stop and might have even backfired on you. You were patient and fast, aiming to gather the much-needed evidence you required. These two people are horrible, not just because of their actions, but because they married two people and hid the affairs they had. I believe luck is on your side. This couldn't have been worse if it came out years later. I wish you the best of luck, OP. Now for today's second story. My wife and I were both busy working people when I discovered our marriage was over. She was 27 and I was 33. We were only married for 2 years, but maybe that was a good thing. On the day it went down, we arranged a short getaway together at a cabin almost 2 hours away from our house. After we arrived and got settled, she asked me to look up a recipe she wanted to make for dinner. My phone was almost dead, so I plugged it in and wondered how she was going to handle this. Over the past few months, I noticed she was distancing herself from me. She was on her phone way more and even added a passcode on it. This was weird because we worked so much, who would be trying to access her phone? She was so open with me up until it all changed and she just didn't feel the need to tell me about her day. So I told her my phone was charging to see what she'd do. She unlocked her phone and tossed it to me as she stirred, telling me to look it up on hers. I did so and read it to her. As I was just about to lock her phone again to be locked out of it forever, a silent WhatsApp notification appeared. I didn't know she had that app. I clicked on it instinctively and it led me to a string of messages between her and another man. The first 2 messages were, "Hey, how's it going?" And I miss you so much. Can't stop thinking about how good you feel. I must have turned white because I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision became blurry and I left the room with her phone. She was still cooking, unaware anything was wrong. I focused my eyes and stilled my trembling hands so I could keep reading older stuff. It spanned back farther than I was willing to look. I took screenshots of their sexting pictures, talk of past sex and plans for future sex. And there I love you. I grabbed my keys with her phone in my hand and left. I didn't say anything to her. As I drove, I forged a message to her lover saying that the getaway ended early and he should meet her at a specific restaurant at a specific time. He agreed. I drove for 2 hours, although it felt like forever. I was in deep thought about what my future held now that my marriage was over. I already had anxiety about the next woman. I fall in love with cheating on me. I wondered what this guy was going to try to do or say to me, but it didn't really matter. The most I wanted was an explanation. When I saw him enter, I recognized him from the pictures and videos. I entered the restaurant right behind him and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He jerked away and looked at me with major concern. Before he could say anything, I told him who I was, that he stole my wife from me and that we should talk about it. I led him to a table, started recording on my phone, which now had all the evidence from my wife's phone as well, and told him to spill the beans. He hesitated, but I told him this was the least he could do. He told me they had been seeing each other for about 10 months already. They were introduced by coworkers and instantly fell for each other. In a few weeks, she was in his bed. He swore she was the one for him and he was in love. I told him he could have it. I had no more use for her. I thanked him profusely for saving me 18 years of child support. I told him where she was and asked him to go pick her up. I drove home with a broken heart. It was broken before, but it was worse knowing how long ago this started. My phone rang and it was the landline from the cabin we were staying at. My wife was panicked, asking me if I was okay and why I just left like that. She added that she couldn't find her phone and forgot we had a landline. I called her a liar and said she shouldn't have let me see her phone if she was guilty of having an affair. She was stunned and started stuttering to make excuses. I told her she need not bother, that I had already met with the man and got all the proof I need. She started yelling in surprise, trying to clarify where I knew and who I spoke to. I added that he was on the way to come get her and she should pack all of our stuff. She said something else, but I hung up. I arrived home and packed up what I needed to be okay for a few months. I didn't know how long she'd be in the house before she left. Thankfully we got a prenup so I wouldn't lose the house or pay her alimony. The last thing I did was update her social media. Changed her status to single and posted a selfie of the two. I put her phone down and heard it immediately start blowing up with confused friends and family. I called my best friend to vent and cry, and not only did he have space for me to stay for a while, but he also arranged for me to meet with his cousin, a divorce attorney. Before my friend arrived to pick me up, my wife was brought home by her lover. She was upset with me, which was ridiculous, and she kept asking me questions. For someone who knew what was going on, she sure was clueless. I started playing the recording of her lover explaining how they met and started sleeping together. She started crying her eyes out, claiming that he was exaggerating their relationship and she never planned on leaving me or continuing to see him. When she said this, he was standing in the doorway unbeknownst to her. He was offended and laughed. I thought good for him as he drove down the road and my wife screamed in frustration. I told her to pack her stuff and get out of the house because it belonged to me. I added that I'd send divorce papers to her parents' house. She sat on the front step crying as I left. I heard that she was still living with them when her boyfriend left her after an astounding 2 months. Since I had been paying for her schooling, she struggled to afford it on her own. Her parents couldn't afford it and actually made her move into a tiny apartment with her much younger sister. Meanwhile, I met the love of my life and we have our second child on the way. I can now say without a doubt that my wife is faithful, loving, and meant for me. I'm so thankful I decided to leave my ex right away without staying and trying to work it out. I am so sorry you went through this, OP. Thank the universe you didn't end up raising an affair child as your own or paying child support for years. It's extremely lucky you discovered the truth when you did and had the strength to take the steps you needed to. She started sleeping with a coworker without much hesitation or thought about her marriage with you. It turned out that even the man she cheated on you with dumped her. This is an excellent story to help spread hope to people that have been cheated on. It's definitely possible to let go of what you're used to and exist outside your comfort zone in order to heal and live a better life. I wish you and your new wife all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. She would put on her underwear and run home to hide her secret from her husband. But what was the secret? Today, we will tell you life stories and accounts of how wives are forced to use different ways to take pity on their husbands. Are you ready to find out the truth? I want to tell you a very ambiguous story, although some might not call it ambiguous. It was about a kiss, and you can say 100 years ago, which resulted in a worse than nuclear war. To help you understand the whole picture, I am 40 years old, my wife Elizabeth 36, and of course, has a child 10 years old. Everything is fine with money and so on. The beginning of the whole story, if of course, you can believe my dear wife, was one evening on February 23rd. Our colleagues in the organization and I, of course, congratulated each other. A little by the evening, we celebrated the whole thing in the workplace. The girls at work set the table for us. I call my wife. Liz, we are here. Well, this is the very little. If you have a chance, after work, come straight here for me. We'll celebrate here a little bit. Well, you can pick me up and drive, so I don't have to leave my car here. I'm good. If I'd known how this simple request of mine would end, I wouldn't have drank at all, and I would have picked up whoever and wherever I wanted at once. Long or short, the dinners at work that night were also a humbling event. They were there too, congratulating the staff. In general, we had more bottles of cognac that evening than expected, and some of our young people here began to play the bottle. Well, like young people play, and we are older just for fun. We are sitting. Anyway, I think it's time to write to my wife. Where are you? She's texting me. I'm getting in a cab. I'll be right there. Okay. I take some more cognac, stand closer to the exit. There's a window, at least to get some air, and the sleeves on my shirt, of course, are already rolled up. Mine and everyone else's is fine. All of a sudden, one of our youngest madams comes up, and she calls me by my name and patronymic. Anyway, there's that bottle there pointed at me, and she kind of has to kiss me here, and in general, not really expecting an answer from me, takes my chin right with two hands and kisses me, without taking away from me and turning her head to the staff. Well, sort of, so that they can see that she has completed this task. Well, as you have already realized, of course, at this point, my wife walks in as well. Oil painting. We're kind of standing there with this madam, just the two of us. It all looks like we stepped away from the collective for some business. We both smell of alcohol. Well, the last moments of the kiss, I think the wife saw perfectly well too. I pretended as if nothing had happened. There really wasn't anything going on. I had nothing to do with it, but it wasn't. While Lisa and I, my wife and I were in the car, we were talking as if nothing had happened. In fact, I figured we'd probably talk tomorrow, if we talked at all, and for nothing. The next day, my wife was already blacker than a cloud. I somehow explained to her what it was, and after a couple of days, she, kind of believed me. I exhaled, but it turned out far from that. A month goes by to 6 months, and every time, on occasion, and without it, my wife immediately reminds me of this case, and because of these reminders, fight more. I told her if she did not forgive me, she could have told me so, instead of forgiving at first, and then reminding me every day. As soon as I said that, and got really angry, she immediately took a step back, saying that she was kidding, and that she would relax. But if the quarrel again, she immediately reminds me of it all again. In short, found a string, how to act on the nerves. Here, so to speak, as it is impossible, I turned out to her something like a promotion. She had been working in a jewelry store, and after an employee in their larger office went on maternity leave, Elizabeth was offered the job. The neighborhood was a little farther from home, but the pay was higher, and so on. I generally agreed without asking me, and the schedule was from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the schedule was 3 days through 3. I, by the way, paid attention at once. It was the first time I had ever heard of such a schedule, but later found out what kind of schedule, what hobbies, except work, there were dinners. Anyway, it's been a year and a half, and then she walks into our lounge in the evening, and says, I'm sick of it all. I honestly, at first I thought the conversation was about work. You don't give me any time or attention at all. Well, don't make promises that you will now. You're an adult, you can't be changed. I've made up my mind, I've been thinking for a long time. In short, the point is that I have to go out now. Of course, I'm shocked. The next day, I try to talk again, and she is not, all in the same spirit. Torture my presence, to cut a long story short, I was not going to torture anyone. I decided to go to a friend's house for a couple of weeks at their empty house. It happens that people get bored with each other, and as a result, we make up. But it turned out to be much more interesting. We are sitting with a friend at this dacha, and with his encouragement, we come to the conclusion that there is something for a reason. It has been a week and a half. The wife, in terms of communication, doesn't even scratch the surface. Yes, and crowned, we need a break from each other. In such stories usually means something else. Anyway, I think, well, did someone show up? My friend definitely thinks so. And in my brain, at once her surfaces schedule 3 days and 3. Long or short, it looks like she has someone. And that someone is connected to her at this exact time. 3 days and 3, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. What to do? I called the next day at my wife's to talk. But no, she stayed in the position she was in. We'll take a break from each other, but we'll decide sometime later too. Yeah, sure. But anyway, there's nothing to do. I take my friend's car and drive right up to the driveway at 8 in the morning, so I can actually see where she's going and when. She gets out in the morning, jumps in a cab, and goes to this job of hers. I walk her there, driving to mine. Then in the evening, I decide to go to her place again and see who will give her a ride home from work tonight. Well, if she got a ride. But then the situation repeats itself again. I can't follow my wife around indefinitely. I am also at work. In fact, there is no evidence. I have no guarantees that this is not nothing, and I do not do nonsense. In short, again, we are sitting at the cottage with a friend. And it has been almost a month. I come to our house and see my son. But Elizabeth doesn't say yes or no. I wouldn't want to talk about it now. Let's get through these days. And then we'll see what and where it takes us. Okay, imagine what I have to do. I mean, there's no reason to get divorced. But it's not a life together under these conditions either. But fortunately, this epic is still over. This same friend calls me and asks the address of the salon where his wife works. Listen, he said, it's all so cool and big. Where is it located? I need to buy a gift certificate. And while I'm there, maybe out of your tears, I'll talk to you. I gave him that address, the phone number. He called me back 2 hours later and told me his wife wasn't there. 2 counselors are there and no one from the bosses. But it's probably not her shift. I tell him, but my heart is restless. I take the car and go to the house. I come home and there is no one at home. Where is she then? I call her, she doesn't answer. I call her parents and she's not there either. The time had already come for the evening. I get in the car, go to her work, drove up, stood far away, waited. 8 p.m. comes up. I see Lisa coming out of the salon. And there's a guy next to her looking maybe 20 or 25. They go to his bad weather expensive and honest stamp. And in fact, they get in. I will not describe my emotions. They were contradictory. Well, on the one hand, at least I knew that my suspicions were not groundless. Well, on the other hand, I wanted to go out and ask questions directly. But luckily, I held back at the time. As it turned out, rightly so. I'm sitting here wondering where, in fact, they're going. They drove home. He dropped her off in front of our driveway and left. I immediately picked her up, parked my car right there and went straight up to our house. Opened the door with my key. She was already on her phone with someone. I took the cell phone out of her hand. And while it was unlocked, I went to her message. For this month, while she's been out here, let's say walking around. Apparently, my return wasn't really expected. So all the messages with this young, handsome guy, she did not delete at all. Anyway, I read everything in there. It turns out that in this main office, there is a management office. And this boy is actually, well, he's the son of one of the executives of this network. That's actually why you don't see him going up to her house. They had an office right at work for that. Now I see. That's actually why my friend today, when he came to the jewelry store, he didn't find Lisa at her workplace. The work must have been done in the office. Anyway, I didn't see any tears or sobs that night. She didn't really deny it. On the contrary, she finally told me all the things they'd been thinking about me for the past 2 years. Of course, they remembered that kissed on February 23rd, adding that that was just the tip of the iceberg. And supposedly, there's a bunch more betrayals behind me that she's sure she won't remember and figure out. That's it. Like I said, the whole situation is ambiguous. Somebody could say, it's your own fault. It was you on February 23rd kissed that lady. But I don't think that's a big deal. And it's a damn good excuse. And it's not a good excuse on February 23rd. He always thought his wife was just going to beauty salon treatments to keep her skin in shape. But when he happened to notice intimate treatments being performed right outside their apartment windows. But what he found out made him lose his head and raise a ruckus that all the neighbors in their building remembered. I want to tell you a truly detective story, witnesses and even participants, which happened to be myself. Saturday evening, I received a phone call from a friend of mine. Where are you? What are you? How are you? Let's see you. We can even talk in my house. Or better yet, let's meet at the store first. I think that without the store, we will not make it here. All right. I got ready, got in a cab and went to my friend's place. Anyway, after a short conversation, it turned out that he and his wife had had another fight. For the 10th or 20th time this month, I asked him approximately yes. And where is she now? I don't know. Turns out they've been having it for a month now. And each time, in order not to make this situation worse, Andrew goes to his office so that he and his wife alone would blow off steam, cool off. And he goes back to their house the next day or every other day. And little by little, everything kind of calms down. But after a while, it's all over again. He leaves the house again. Of course, they disconnect their phones from each other at these moments. And this has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And then it coincided with the weekend. So what do I tell him? And that I did not really want to ruin the weekend today, says Andre. But no matter how hard I tried, we still had a fight. I kind of left again. But then I decided to talk right away and make things work out. Call her. Her phone is off. Came home a couple of hours later. She's not home. Get it? Yeah. So we sat down with him for a while, finished what we brought from the store. It's outside. But for a second, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting there feeling that we were starting to sober up a little bit. We had a last drink of tea. And I said I was going home. Otherwise, yours will come. And we are sitting in this kind of well condition. Moreover, that you have already quarreled, not very much it will look from the outside. Although to return to her husband only in the morning is also not very from the outside. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We said goodbye. I threw on my jacket and went downstairs. Standing near their doorway. It's a little cold. It's early spring. I got out on purpose and didn't call a cab. I thought I would take a walk, get some air, have a smoke, but then I would go. I looked and there was no lighter in my pocket. I searched all my pockets, and there was definitely no lighter. It seems to be on Andre's balcony. And those back to his 3rd floor. The last thing I wanted now. Moreover, I look out the window. The light at Andrew is not lit. Probably asleep. Okay. And I see in their yard in front of Andrew's new house. There's a car with the lights on and parked in the so-called second row. But it means kind of came recently. And for sure there is someone inside. I come up in the back. I see the front window is ajar. I said, buddy, they're gonna be lighters. He reached for the ceiling light in the car and turned on the interior light. I'm standing outside in the dark and can't see me. I can see the cabin with the lights on pretty well. No one in the passenger seat. It's pushed all the way forward. I hear a lady's voice coming from the back seat. She said to my date. Okay, I gotta go. I'll call you. And she kissed the driver on the cheek. I leaned over to look and the lady had already opened kind of the back door, but also kind of on her way out. I looked closer. It's Marinka. I think it's Andrea. I immediately turned my back to them. I hear her get out of the car, slam the back door. Well, and goes to his entrance home. That's right. The driver couldn't find a lighter, started the car and told me that yes, now the cigarette lighter. I was sobered up by such surprises from Marinka. And I thought that I should make friends with this friend. I wonder if it's a brother or some colleague at work. And now I'll take Andrew. Although why would she then was a colleague to kiss something? Okay. I hear it. And his car chain noise. Well, when he started the car, I could hear it under the hood. And I said to him, that's the chain. They have a problem area. Yes, we allegedly when we worked in the service in the non-existent, when we came often on these, the owners often thought that the matter was moving towards a full-blown engine overhaul, but it turned out not. He tells me yes. And I was getting kind of wary too. So back and forth, we talked a little bit. I said, that's it. I should go home. It's time. Which way are you going now? He told me the direction. I told him I was going that way too. Let's go. Let's go. Do you mind if I sit in the back? They're going to stop the smell of alcohol and all that. Okay. I get in the back. I see the front passenger seat is definitely in an unnatural position for him. It's too far forward. Anyway, we're driving along. We're talking. I'm telling him about his date. Pretty girl, you know, got a girlfriend. He says she's got a lot of things. Are we laughing? Okay. I run my left hand over the back seat. And I feel like there's nothing there. I look and we're pretty far gone. I think it's time for me to get out too. Okay. There's a junction coming up. I tell him. And after the stop, I came all turned on my phone flashlight. I look in on the floor directly behind the driver's seat is a hairbrush. Obviously not a man's, but I think let it be evidence. If everything is confirmed and if it doesn't, I'll call and I'll give it back. We exchanged phone numbers with the driver. He said if there was a problem with the engine, he could call. I went out and called my friend to whom the wife returned in the morning. Andrew did not pick up the phone. I took a cab back to the house. The next day, Andrew called back himself, but there was no sensation. I told him about how last night I had fun investigating the alleged cheating and that I even have proof of a sort, but it turned out that Marinka herself took and told him I got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Andrew could they're in an unsuitable state for such a conversation. In short, as a result, they and his friends, all what they think and everything as it is said, that's pretty much it. The only really unpleasant thing about this story is that there is no consistency. First, they should have broken up and then they should have thrown their calms, walking around at least until morning. If you like this story, don't forget to rate it and give it a like.